In this lesson, we will cover Chapter 10 on development, looking at Key Issue 3 and Key Issue 4. In Key Issue 3, we're going to look at why countries face challenges to development. We're going to be looking at the two different paths to development, world trade, financing development, and development challenges during hard times. Let's talk about the two paths to development, starting with the self-sufficiency path. In the self-sufficiency model, countries encourage domestic production of goods and discourage foreign ownership of businesses and resources. This protects their businesses from international competition. After India gained independence from Britain in 1947, it became the leading example of self-sufficiency. Policies included limiting foreign companies from importing into India and exercising strong control over companies operating in India. Some examples of policies of self-sufficiency include requiring foreign companies to secure licenses in order to do business in a country. It could also mean that the government imposes very heavy taxes on imported goods to discourage from purchasing those products as opposed to domestic products. Another way is for companies to be owned by the government instead. Again, for more control to happen to try to push out international competition. Now, as India has let go of a lot of these self-sufficiency policies, they've moved into more of an international trade path and also have one of the fastest growing economies in the world today. Second, looking at the international trade model, countries open themselves to foreign investment in international markets. For most of the 20th century, self-sufficiency or balanced growth was the more popular of the development alternatives, but today international trade has become much more popular and is at the center of globalization. Some international trade examples from the text include the four Asian dragons, which are among the first places to adopt the international trade path, including South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. The next is the petroleum-rich Arabian Peninsula states. The Arabian Peninsula includes Saudi Arabia, the region's largest, most populous country, as well as Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, and the United Arab Emirates. The Asian dragons focus on producing manufactured goods like clothing and electronics, and the Arabian Peninsula countries use petroleum revenues to finance large-scale projects such as housing, highways, hospitals, airports, universities, and telecommunications networks. A very important model you should be familiar with is Rostow's model of international trade. This model helps us better understand where countries are at in their level of development. If a country is in the first stage, it's a traditional society. This means the economy is very much dependent on things like agriculture or military and religion. The next stage includes preconditions for takeoff. This means that the most educated people happen to be in leadership positions. A country might start to invest in technology and infrastructure like water supplies and transportation systems, and this infrastructure will then lead to a stimulation of productivity. The third stage is takeoff, and this is where you see rapid growth generated in a limited number of economic activities like textiles or food production. The next stage is the drive to maturity, and this is where you see rapid growth and industrialization. In the drive to maturity stage, we see that workers are also becoming more skilled and specialized. The last stage of development is the age of mass consumption. This is where the economy shifts from precondition of heavy industry, like steel and energy, to consumer goods, like motor vehicles and refrigerators. Let's take a look at figure 10-34, located on page 370 of your textbook. Trade has increased more rapidly than wealth. We can see this measured by GDP. This is the gross domestic product. It measures all outputs of a country and the value of goods and services. During the late 20th century and early 21st centuries, we can see the growth that has occurred. This is a measure of the growing importance of the international trade approach, especially in developing countries. So both developed and developing countries are increasingly reliant on trade as a contributor to their GDP. As you can see in figure 10-35, India's GDP growth under self-sufficiency is shown on the left, and under international trade shown on the right. Check out how much more rapidly growth occurred under the international trade approach. To promote the international trade development model, countries representing 97% of world trade established the World Trade Organization in 1995. The WTO works to reduce barriers to international trade in two principal ways. First, countries negotiate reduction or elimination of international trade restriction on manufactured goods, such as government subsidies for exports or quotas for imports, and tariffs on both imports and exports. Also, reduced or eliminated restrictions on the international movement of money by banks, corporations, and wealthy individuals. Take a look at figure 10-36. The World Trade Organization works to increase free trade between member countries. However, critics, like the ones you see pictured here in the Philippines, oppose the WTO for several reasons. For example, many believe the WTO is anti-democratic because decisions made behind closed doors promote the interests of large corporations rather than poor people. Some others believe that the WTO involvement can also disturb the natural relationship of supply and demand and force taxes upon specific countries for their products. There is no doubt that in today's globalized world, countries that want to develop need money. They can do this in a number of ways, including foreign direct investment from corporations and loans from places like the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund. Foreign direct investment is done privately, and it is made by a foreign company in the economy of another country. Instead of private foreign investments, loans can also be made by world organizations. The World Bank can provide loans for multiple reasons. The World Bank can provide loans to countries to reform public administration and legal institutions, develop and strengthen financial institutions, and implement transportation and social service projects. It's also important to note that the World Bank is able to lend money because of the private investments that come into that bank. This complicates things because it means the World Bank may also have to look out for the investments of the people who contribute. This may limit tremendously how much they're willing to loan and to whom, as well as what they're willing to loan for. The International Monetary Fund does not give loans for projects per se. Instead, it's designed to help a country rebuild international reserves, stabilize their currency exchange rates, and pay for imports without the imposition of harsh trade restrictions or capital controls that could hamper the growth of world trade. Something that complicates the International Monetary Fund is that the money that comes into it happens to be on the basis of each member country's relative size in the world economy. Take a quick look at figure 10-39. This graph shows growth in FDI, meaning foreign direct investment. We can see it in East Asia and Latin America, and they've received the highest levels of foreign direct investment among developing regions. Remember that most foreign direct investment is out of and into developed countries in North America and Europe. Investment does not flow equally around the world. Only 1/3 of foreign direct investment went to developing countries in 2013, while the other 2/3 went to developed countries. This allows already developed regions of the world to continue to grow much more rapidly, even when developing countries are starting to grow, they are not able to catch up to or even come close to the already developed regions. Looking at figure 10-41, we can see that the World Bank loans the most money to countries in Asia. Figure 10-42 shows a World Bank funded road construction project in Kabul, Afghanistan. Taking a look at figure 10-43, we can see that sometimes international borrowing can lead to more debt than countries can actually repay. This can often lead to countries that are already struggling to develop to have a much harder time acquiring more loans to alleviate this problem. Some things that can go wrong include projects not functioning as intended because of faulty engineering, recipient nations squandering or spending aid on armaments, meaning weapons, instead of investments in infrastructure, or aid might be stolen, and also new infrastructure may not attract other investment. Owing a lot of interest can be very staggering to a country trying to develop. And some income for an entire year may not even exceed just the interest that a country may owe in previous loans. The last key issue of Chapter 10 will cover development challenges during hard times. Sometimes countries may find that they're experiencing a downturn or a recession. They will respond to this in two ways, either through stimulus programs that the government uses, so government would spend money to try to stimulate the economy, or austerity measures, meaning that spending is actually cut by the government dramatically and taxes are cut to the people so they can spend their money. These two economic directions can be quite controversial in a country, especially here in the United States, with more Democrats being in favor of stimulus programs as opposed to more conservatives being more in favor of austerity measures. When developing countries suffer and look to the International Monetary Fund for help, the IMF may impose structural adjustment programs. This may impose very strict measures on the country seeking support as to not incentivize them or not to make it too easy for them to get this help. What the IMF might do is require that the country can only spend what it can afford, that it has to cut its spending substantially, and that it must also encourage for more productive private sector methods. Many people criticize these requirements because they see this as a major cut in services that are necessary for the poorest people. Cuts health, education, and social services that actually benefit the poor. It also leads to higher unemployment and loss of jobs in state enterprises and civil service. Again, it also provides for less support of those most in need. So, in turn, it punishes the poorest countries in the world. Debates over stimulus and austerity measures also exist in Europe as a result of the 2008 global crisis, and the northern countries that happen to be much more wealthy often criticize or blame the countries in the south for economic instability. Southern countries believe that northern countries should be investing more and they may be more inclined to support stimulus programs, whereas northern countries believe that some of the southern countries should adopt more austerity measures, meaning they should cut back on spending and things they can't afford. Microfinance is a way that women in less developed countries can access loans, and it also helps countries with poor banking. It allows for women to be able to invest in their families, invest in businesses, and it's seen as a great small-scale way of developing countries. Key issue 4 focuses on fair trade standards. This is connected to sustainability. The fair trade movement focuses primarily on products exported from developing countries to developed countries. With fair trade, we're looking for fair trade for producers. Critics of international trade charge that only a tiny percentage of the price consumers pay for actually reaches the individuals in developing countries who are responsible for making and growing it. They also seek fair trade for workers. Protection of workers' rights that are not a high priority are made a high priority through fair trade. And so this can be done by oversight of workers' conditions by governments and international leading agencies. Fair trade for consumers is also really important. Most fair trade products are food, including coffee, tea, bananas, chocolate, cocoa, juice, wine, sugar, and honey. A cooperative store, for example, is a way that member-owned, member-governed businesses can operate for the benefit of its members. Remember that the United Nations also has the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that they hope will contribute to increased HDI among countries.